They laughed when I said no to wine and called me a failure when I couldn't afford a car. But last night, their faces froze when they saw the ring on my hand, one worth more than their entire house. I didn't gloat, I smiled. They thought I came for revenge, but I came for her. For the woman, they erased. You think this story is about jewellery? It's not. It's about what happens when the silent child becomes the storm. The forgotten heir returns, not to ask for a seat at the table, but to flip the whole damn thing. The night air smelled of roasted garlic and citrus furniture polish as Avery Miles stepped onto the porch of the house that used to be hers, or at least felt that way before the silence started growing roots. The same swing hung on its rusted chains, the same black shutters framed the windows, but everything else had changed, including her. She hadn't stood here in almost 6 years, and still the welcome mat read, "Miles family, built on grace." She wiped her boots on it out of habit, not respect. Inside, the house was louder than she remembered. Laughter, silverware, the shrill clink of wine glasses, and the murmur of a dozen overlapping conversations. No one greeted her at the door. She unbuttoned her grey coat, cheap but clean, and moved toward the dining room. As expected, every seat was taken. The table had been extended, cloth napkins folded into fans, candles flickering between serving trays. An extra chair had been pulled back from the end, positioned as if it were a last-minute thought. She knew it was for her. She also knew no one would pull it out. "Still taking the bus, Avery?" Sienna's voice slid across the room like cold butter on marble. Her lipstick didn't smudge when she smirked, but her disdain was loud enough to stain the walls. Avery said nothing. She placed her coat on the back of the forgotten chair, pulled it out herself, and sat with the steadiness of someone who'd prepared for this very moment. Her mother glanced up, offered a polite nod that didn't touch her eyes, then returned to slicing lamb with robotic precision. Gordon, her stepfather, grunted in acknowledgement without lifting his gaze from his plate. The room was full, yet she'd never felt more alone. "Everyone, to family," Sienna chimed, raising a crystal glass. "Even those who prefer to haunt rather than host." A few snickers followed, not laughter, just enough noise to make Avery's ears burn. She picked up her fork. Ate in silence. She'd forgotten how heavy silence could feel when it was intentional. Conversation flowed easily around her, but never toward her. Sienna was regaling their cousin with tales of luxury listings in Malibu. Gordon debated politics with a neighbour. And their mother recounted a charity gala where she single-handedly raised $25,000 for stained glass restoration. No one asked where Avery had been. No one asked why she returned. Halfway through the main course, her sleeve slipped slightly as she reached for her water. That's when the diamond caught the light, not just any diamond, a rare oval cut in a custom platinum setting. Silent, but unmistakably elite. The room shifted. Her mother froze mid-sentence. Gordon blinked. Sienna tilted her head, her eyes narrowing in a twitch of disbelief. Avery didn't rush. She turned the ring slightly with her thumb, then met each pair of eyes with unshaken calm. "Oh, this?" she said softly. "Just something I picked up on a quiet Tuesday." The silence that followed was the loudest sound of the night. Even the candles seemed to flicker differently. Avery took a sip of her water as if nothing had happened. Her plate remained untouched now. The food had gone cold, but her presence had just turned boiling. Avery let the silence settle a moment longer, then gently set her glass down. The ring still caught the candlelight, casting flickers across the linen tablecloth. All eyes remained fixed on her. She didn't need this attention, but she had earned the right to be heard. She stood slowly, letting the legs of her chair scrape against the hardwood floor. A deliberate, delicate sound that somehow echoed louder than the laughter from earlier. Her voice when it came was even and quiet. "I didn't come here to show off a ring," she said. "I came for her." A beat passed, then another. Her mother's mouth twitched as if to interrupt, but Avery continued. "For Lucinda. For the woman who sat in that seat every year until her hands trembled too much to lift a fork." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Someone cleared their throat. No one spoke. Avery gestured toward the empty end of the table. "No cushion, no plate, no place set. Did no one think she deserved to be remembered tonight?" "She's gone, Avery," her mother said, brittle. "This isn't a séance." Avery's lips tightened. "No, it's a dinner. One where the woman who raised me has been erased." She didn't wait for a response. She stepped back from the table and turned away. Her heels made no sound on the hallway runner, but her absence boomed louder than any argument could have. As she moved through the corridor, her eyes scanned the walls. She knew what used to hang there, rows of framed family photos, their glossy surfaces aging unevenly, but always centered around Lucinda. The warm smile, the wide-brimmed church hats, the stubborn garden gloves. Now they were gone. In their place was a massive framed advertisement, "Sienna Miles, your luxury agent in Beverly Hills." Glossy, golden, and utterly hollow, Sienna's perfectly curated face smiled back at her from the centre, all filters and polish. Avery stood in front of it, unmoving. Her throat tightened, but she swallowed hard. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a folded photo, creased at the corners, faded from years of being kept close. It was Lucinda, sitting on the back porch, sun in her eyes, holding a bowl of green beans with Avery beside her, laughing at something neither of them remembered. She stepped forward to pin it back where it once belonged. But before she could, something caught her eye. On the baseboard, beneath the old photo spot. A faint mark, barely visible in the dim hallway light. She knelt, brushing her hand across the wood. It wasn't just a scuff, it was a note, written in faded ballpoint pen, barely larger than a whisper. "Don't let them erase you like they erased me." Avery's breath caught. The handwriting, Lucinda's. It had to be. Shaky but still legible, like it had been written quickly, maybe when she sensed her memory being peeled from the walls. She pressed her palm to the spot, tears brimming. Behind her, laughter resumed, hollow, distracted, as if pretending nothing had happened could reset the evening. But Avery stood frozen, fingers still on the words. Her body trembling not with sadness, but with something deeper. Resolve. She didn't return to the table. Instead, she slid the photo into the frame of the hallway mirror, where it didn't belong, but desperately needed to be. She stepped back once, glanced at her own reflection, and whispered to it, not as a vow, but as a promise. "I remember you, Grandma, and I won't let them forget." The door creaked as Avery pushed it open. Her old room smelled faintly of mothballs and disuse. Dust motes danced in the stale afternoon light, seeping through half-closed blinds. Where there had once been a twin bed with a lopsided quilt and posters of constellations on the walls, there were now cardboard boxes stacked knee-high and plastic bins labelled holiday decor and garage sale. At eye level, taped to the outside of the door, a single white label read in bold black marker, "Extra." Avery didn't need to ask whose handwriting it was. Her mother's organisational efforts were always blunt, sterile, practical to the point of cruelty. She stepped inside carefully, as if disturbing the dust might disturb something deeper. Her fingers grazed a chipped nightstand she hadn't seen in years, and she half expected to find a book or an old bracelet inside. But the drawer stuck, swollen with time. When she finally wrenched it open, it was empty, emptier than it had any right to be. "Didn't think you'd be nostalgic," came a voice from the doorway. Avery turned. Sienna leaned against the frame, arms crossed, one stiletto heel hooked lazily over the other. Her lipstick was perfect. Her tone wasn't. "Or are you rehearsing for your next tragic monologue?" she added with a smirk. "You always were the star of your own pity party." Avery didn't flinch. She reached into the inside pocket of her coat and pulled out a small antique key. Iron, ornate, heavy, in a way that suggested it opened more than just metal. Sienna's smirk faltered. "What's that? A prop?" "No," Avery said, her voice steady. "It's what Grandma gave me the week before she passed." Sienna's arms uncrossed, but she didn't move from the doorway. "She told me something," Avery continued, "that this key opened what the rest of you pretended didn't exist. Something she wanted kept safe." "Let me guess," Sienna said, tone still mocking but edged now with a thin line of tension. "A box full of your childhood drawings. A secret will? Some handwritten confession that makes you the saint and the rest of us the villains?" Avery held the key out in the light. "She said, 'Don't open it until they've tried to rewrite me.'" Sienna blinked, just once. It was subtle, but Avery saw it. The crack behind the mask. The flinch of fear. "I don't have time for cryptic fairy tales," Sienna muttered, turning to go. But her steps weren't as confident as her voice. They were quick, clipped, uneven. Avery sat on the old ottoman by the window, letting the key rest on her palm. The word extra still loomed behind her, like a label meant to erase, not organize. Her hands curled tightly around the iron. They had always tried to tuck her away, like an afterthought, like clutter. But Lucinda hadn't. Lucinda had known where to place her love, and how to pass it on. Avery slipped the key back into her coat, stood, and looked around the room one last time. There was nothing left here for her, but there was something ahead. Something locked, something waiting, and this time she wouldn't wait to be invited. The hallway outside her room had fallen silent, save for the creak of the old floorboards beneath Avery's measured steps. She didn't know why she turned back, perhaps habit, perhaps something less rational, but when she did, her mother was standing there. Delaya's arms were crossed, but her expression wasn't the usual veneer of pride or irritation. It was calculated, like someone running numbers in her head. "I thought you were gone for good," Delaya said, voice clipped, not quite disappointment, more like control slipping. "I was," Avery replied. "Then I remembered I still had questions." Her mother nodded once, stepping inside the room as if reclaiming territory. She looked around like she didn't recognize it or didn't want to. "It's just storage now. We needed the space." "For what?" Avery asked flatly. "To store the things you can't throw out but don't want to see." Delaya's lips pressed into a thin line. "I see you're still dramatic." Avery laughed once, sharp, humorless, and "you're still in denial." Then came the pause, the shift. "I wanted to protect you," Delaya said suddenly, eyes fixed on a bin marked winter linens. You were unstable," Avery blinked, her voice thinning. "Excuse me?" 10 years ago, you were working 2 jobs, barely sleeping, taking care of Mother, like she was your child instead of hers." Her voice was quieter now. "You weren't eating. You'd stare off for minutes, talk to yourself sometimes. We thought, Gordon and I, we thought maybe you needed help. Avery stepped back like the air itself had slapped her. You were going to institutionalise me? It wasn't like that, Delia snapped. We spoke to someone, just consultations. You were spiralling. No, Avery said, her voice low, cold. I was exhausted. I was grieving, and you didn't like how messy that looked. There it was. A crack wide enough to fall through. Delia turned toward the doorway, but before she could escape, Avery said, You labelled me unstable so you could sleep at night without feeling guilty. Her mother didn't answer. When the footsteps faded, Avery sat on the floor beside the desk. She reached for the lower drawer, the one that always jammed. This time, it gave way with a reluctant groan. Inside, past old receipts and dust-coated notebooks, her fingers brushed something thin and waxy, an envelope. It had been taped flat to the bottom of the drawer, nearly invisible unless someone knew to look. She peeled it away carefully, unfolding it with hands that trembled. Lucinda's handwriting, not just a letter, an instruction. Avery, if they've made you doubt your own mind, know this. Truth doesn't scream. It waits. In the safety box beneath the blue quilt. Combination, your birth date, reversed. Do not open it until your voice is louder than their version of you. Tears stung Avery's eyes, not from pain, but from vindication, from the clarity that cuts sharper than betrayal, the box, the quilt. She knew exactly what her grandmother meant. In Lucinda's old room, under the cedar trunk where family keepsakes were kept, lay a faded blue quilt, stitched with uneven stars. Under it, apparently, was the truth they had tried to bury with her. She pressed the letter to her chest and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. They called her unstable. But Lucinda had seen her clearly, and now she saw Lucinda more than ever. The office of Tobias Fields smelled like old paper and lemon-scented polish. It was tucked between a failing print shop and a laundromat that hadn't updated its signage since the 90s. But the air inside felt purposeful. Everything about it was designed to say, here, things are still done the old-fashioned way. Avery stepped in, her boots clicking softly against the worn parquet. A desk fan hummed in the corner, stirring stale air in the edge of a yellowing manila folder. "You're early, Aunt," came a voice from behind a file cabinet. Aunt Millie emerged, looking smaller than Avery remembered, her cardigan draped over bony shoulders, like a curtain barely clinging to a rod. In her hands she clutched a bouquet of daisies, fresh, hopeful, and completely out of place in this room full of legal ghosts. "I didn't think you'd actually come," Millie said, voice a gentle rasp. "But I'm glad you did." Tobias Fields himself appeared next, walking slowly but with quiet command. His glasses slid low on his nose, and he offered Avery a curt nod before motioning her toward a leather chair with cracked armrests. "We've been holding this," he said simply, sliding a thick envelope across the desk. "Your grandmother was precise." Millie placed the flowers beside the window, then sat down beside Avery. The moment her hand touched Avery's wrist, something in her steadied. Avery opened the envelope. Inside, she found several documents, notarized pages, legal seals, a USB drive taped inside a folded letter, and beneath all of it, a handwritten note in Lucinda's slanted cursive. She opened that first. "My Avery, if you're reading this, it means I've gone, and they've tried to box you into silence again. You always let their noise push your truth aside. But not this time, not anymore. Everything is yours. The house, the Montana land, the savings, even the box you used to ask me about in the attic. You knew it was more than just dusty silverware. You saw what others ignored. Don't let them make you small, and whatever you do, don't be quiet. Love, Grandma L. Avery exhaled shakily. Her chest ached with something like grief. But deeper, like being seen after years of walking invisible, she looked up. Is this all legal? Tobias nodded once. Signed, witnessed, and filed. She came to me in person nearly a year ago. Alone. Made sure every page was bulletproof. Millie leaned closer. She said they'd try to claim she was confused. That grief made them cruel, but she knew what she was doing. Avery stared at the USB drive. What's on this? Press play, Tobias said, already sliding over a laptop. The screen blinked. A grainy video came into focus. Lucinda sat in her favourite chair, the one with the quilted arms and uneven legs. Her hair was thinner, but her eyes were sharp. If they're watching this, she began, then they're probably saying I lost my mind. But I didn't lose anything except patience. She smiled, tired but firm. I watched Avery give when no one else did. While the rest of them rehearsed grief, she lived it, so I rewrote everything. And if that makes them angry, good. They never deserved her in the first place. The screen went black. Avery didn't move. She didn't speak. She just closed her eyes and let that truth settle, warm and heavy in the hollow places they tried to fill with shame. Avery unfolded the second page of her grandmother's letter, her fingers trembling slightly as if the truth were too sharp to touch. The ink had faded in places, but Lucinda's voice came through with surgical clarity, soft in tone, brutal in content. There's one more thing, baby, something I hoped I'd never have to write. I know what your mother did. For 8 years, she siphoned money from my accounts, small amounts at first, enough that I could excuse it as confusion, later enough that I couldn't. But I said nothing, because I feared what truth would do to this family. Avery paused, breath caught in her throat. Her eyes skimmed the next lines, each word landing like the edge of a blade. I watched her justify it. For the house, she'd say, for your father's surgery, for Sienna's school. But it wasn't. You and I both know where the money went. Brunches, auctions, things with price tags but no meaning. Avery leaned back in the cracked leather chair, letting the paper rest in her lap. Her jaw clenched, and for the first time in days, maybe years, anger didn't scare her. Tobias cleared his throat gently. There's more. He slid another document forward. An account summary. Dozens of transactions, each authorised by Dilea Shaw. Transfers, withdrawals, even payments toward credit card debt under Sienna's name. All drawn from Lucinda's private funds. Avery's throat burned. She knew, she whispered. She knew the whole time. Millie reached out, her touch tentative. She did, and she told me once, I'd rather lose dollars than lose what little peace we have left. Peace? Avery laughed bitterly. That wasn't peace. That was silence dressed up in pearls. She stood abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, the parking lot glistened under a thin layer of drizzle. Everything felt too still, too quiet, like the moment before glass shatters. She watched them drain her, and she smiled through it, Avery muttered. She let them lie to her face, and all she did was bake more pies. You think she was weak, Tobias said quietly, but she wasn't. She chose not to fight in the open. That doesn't mean she didn't prepare for war. Avery turned back, eyes fierce. Well, I won't be quiet, not like she was. I won't watch them rewrite her like they tried to rewrite me. Her hand gripped the folder tighter now. Every document in it felt sacred. Every page a weapon made from truth. They want to bury her memory under glossy ads and charity luncheons. They want to call me unstable because I didn't play the part. Millie's voice broke in. Then don't play it. Burn the script. Avery stared at her aunt, surprised by the fire behind the wrinkles. She gave you everything because you saw her, not as some fragile old woman, but as a builder, a protector. That's what she was. And now it's your turn. The room held its breath. Avery nodded slowly. Then I won't just keep what she gave me, I'll defend it. She gathered the documents, the letter, the USB, and slid them carefully into the envelope. Her hands were steady now. She kept quiet for the family's sake, Avery said, but silence didn't save her. It only let them sharpen their knives behind closed doors. Her voice lowered, but it was iron. I'm done being quiet. The morning light crept across the Pasadena sidewalk in long, golden streaks as Avery stepped out of her car. She parked a few houses down, not from shame, but because the driveway would no longer be theirs for long. In her coat pocket was the folder Tobias had prepared, certified letters, the real will, audio files, her legal sword. A blue van idled in front of the house. The locksmith stood waiting, arms folded, toolbox at his feet. "Morning," he said, not unkindly. "You're the homeowner?" Avery nodded. "I am now." 20 minutes later, every lock, front, back, side gate, had been replaced. Avery stood inside, keys cool in her hand. The air smelled faintly of lemon and steel, the old scent of her mother's cleaner now mixed with something sharper, like a reset. From upstairs came footsteps, slippers, then voices, low, confused, rising in tone. She didn't wait for them to come down. She opened the envelope and laid the documents out neatly on the kitchen island. One for each of them, addressed, notarized, undeniable. Trampling steps thundered down the staircase. Delia appeared first, robe cinched too tight, hair still in curlers. "What is this?" she hissed, eyes locking on the papers. "What are you doing?" "Taking back what was never yours," Avery replied calmly. Behind her, Gordon stumbled in, bleary-eyed. Sienna followed, clutching a phone and a latte, her expression folding from smug to stricken in half a second. "You can't," Delia began, but Avery raised her hand. "I already did. The locks are changed. These are your 72-hour notices." Sienna scoffed. "You can't evict family." "I can," Avery said, "and I have." She turned the laptop toward them, already cued to the clip. A single click. And then Lucinda's voice filled the kitchen. "If they're watching this, they're probably saying, 'I lost my mind.'" The three froze. Delia paled. Gordon's lips moved soundlessly. "I watched Avery give when no one else did," Lucinda continued. "So I rewrote everything." Avery paused the video. "Still think I'm bluffing?" No one answered. Then came the final blow. She reached into the folder and pulled out her phone, opening the voice memo app. Another click. This time, it wasn't Lucinda's voice. It was Sienna. "We wait until she's gone. That Montana land alone could clear our debt." Sienna's voice crackled. Then Delia's. "We'll keep her comfortable. Then we sell." Gordon, "Don't tell Avery, she'll want a cut." The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was exposure, raw, rattling. "You knew she was dying," Avery said, "and you counted dollars while pretending to count minutes." Delia stepped back. She wasn't thinking clearly. She was thinking clearer than any of you, Avery snapped. Sienna reached for the documents, flipping through pages, like she might find a loophole hiding between the lines. "There's nothing left to debate," Avery said. "You don't live here anymore. I'm not asking. I'm informing." Gordon growled, stepping forward. "We raised you..." "Girl, no," Avery said. Voice ainda I Lucinda raised me. You just collected rent on her patience. No one spoke. The kitchen clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the hallway, a floorboard creaked under weight, not moving. I'm not throwing you out tonight, Avery added, but tomorrow the locks change again. Permanently, I suggest you pack. The house felt colder than before, though the thermostat hadn't changed. Avery moved through the living room like someone searching for something specific, something long buried, but not gone. Her hands grazed the edge of the mantel where old family photos used to sit, now replaced by minimalist frames, stock images still inside. She knelt near the fireplace, fingers brushing against the dark soot of the hearth. Something tugged at her memory. Lucinda's stories, her habit of hiding small things in plain sight, under heat, she used to say. Avery's gaze narrowed. She reached behind the iron grate, her hand disappearing into the flue's base. Her fingers touched something brittle, paper. When she pulled it out, her breath caught. An envelope, yellowed and stained, but intact. On the front, in Gordon's clumsy handwriting, probate copy, L. Miles' will. Avery's jaw tightened. She opened it carefully. Inside were 4 pages. A forged will, clearly typed, but signed in shaky handwriting that didn't even resemble Lucinda's. Worse still, a notarization stamp, smudged suspicious, and a declaration stating that, due to concerns over the mental state of one Avery Miles, she is to be excluded as a beneficiary on grounds of diminished capacity. Her name, her identity, questioned, scratched out in ink. She rose, documents in hand, and walked back into the kitchen. Delia and Sienna were still near the island, silent, paralysed. Gordon had slumped into a dining chair like a balloon slowly leaking its false pride. Avery dropped the forged papers on the table with a sharp slap. "Recognise this?" she asked. Delia stepped forward, confused. Sienna peered closer, but Gordon stiffened. "That's not," he began. "It's not the will Grandma signed," Avery said, voice low. "It's the one you wrote." His mouth opened, closed, no denial came. "You declared me mentally unfit. Said I wasn't capable of managing inheritance. You tried to erase me not just from her will, but from reality." Sienna leaned in. "Dad, is this real?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Avery picked up the forged will and walked back toward the fireplace. She knelt again, struck a match from the old tin Lucinda always kept near the logs, and held the flame to the corner of the document. The paper curled inward, blackening. The ink sizzled. The false version of her life burned. "No more lies," she said, loud enough to ring through the rafters. Delia gasped. "That was a legal document." "No," Avery corrected. "That was a crime." The flames hissed, consuming every page. Gordon stood suddenly, face flushed. "We did what we thought was best." "For who?" Avery barked. "For Grandma or your bank account?" The weight of the moment fractured something, not just trust, but illusion. The structure of their control, built on secrecy and spin, had snapped at the seams. Sienna backed away from the table. Her eyes, always so sharp, darted between her parents. "How could you—" she began, but stopped. The reality settled. She had benefited from it too. Avery didn't speak again. She didn't need to. The fire in the hearth was enough. The forged will, now ash. The silence, now honest. From that moment forward, the house no longer belonged to the ones who had ruled it with guilt and manipulation. It belonged to truth. And the truth was this: they weren't a family, not anymore. They were witnesses to their own unravelling. The old church-turned gallery smelled of fresh paint and eucalyptus oil. Sunlight spilled through stained glass windows. colouring the hardwood floor in pools of red, gold and violet. It was a small space, nothing grand, but perfect in its intimacy, just like the woman it was meant to honour. Avery moved quietly through the room, adjusting framed letters, smoothing out placards. Each piece had been carefully chosen. A faded black and white photo of Lucinda, barefoot, on a porch in Georgia, her patchwork quilt folded beside a handwritten poem about morning light, a grocery list scribbled in looping script with a note at the bottom. Leave extra for the shelter. A woman in scrubs walked in first. She paused at the entry, holding a paper cup of coffee like a shield. "I wasn't sure I had the right day," she said softly. "But I saw the name. Liza Miles. Couldn't not come." Avery nodded, her throat tight. "You knew her?" "She knitted blankets every winter," the woman said. "Left them at the hospital anonymously. We figured it out eventually. One year she added tiny initials, LM, in the corners." Not long after, a man in a faded mechanic's shirt stopped in front of the framed recipe card for Lucinda's peach cobbler. "She used to make this every Thursday at the shelter," he said. "Said it was the only way some of us got a taste of home." He lingered, eyes misty, before moving on. The room filled slowly. No press, no pomp, just people. Faces Avery had never seen, but who carried pieces of her grandmother in their memories, like hidden heirlooms. A young nurse told how Lucinda had paid for her textbooks after overhearing her crying in the church pew. A teenager recalled how Lucinda used to walk him home when his mother worked late. Then came the older man in the navy blazer, carrying himself with the stiffness of pride and grief. "I'm Dr. Jordan," he said. "My son. He wouldn't be in med school if it weren't for her." Avery looked up. "She helped with tuition?" "She paid his first semester," he said. "Said it was found money. Never asked for a thank you." By noon, the gallery hummed with soft voices and careful footsteps. No one shouted, no one rushed. They stood in quiet reverence, reading letters Lucinda had written but never sent, running fingers gently over the knitted shawls, pausing at the quote stenciled above the door. She was invisible by choice, not by worth. Avery stood near the centre, hands folded, overwhelmed. She had spent years trying to prove her grandmother's value to people who never cared. And now here was a room full of strangers who had never needed convincing. A man approached, grey-bearded, his hands shaking slightly as he held a photo. She took this of my daughter the year she gave her a winter coat." The image showed a child, bundled too large for her frame, grinning with missing teeth. "She said the coat was magic," he chuckled. "Told her it would help her dream warmer." Avery smiled, the ache in her chest a strange mix of sorrow and something close to peace. Lucinda hadn't needed marble statues or newspaper articles. Her legacy was written in food, warmth, education, and stories whispered in rooms just like this. The warm hush of reverence still lingered in the gallery when the door slammed open, disrupting the quiet like a stone thrown into still water. Delia Shaw swept in first, her beige suit stiff, her heels clicking sharply against the wood floor. Behind her was Sienna, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses, lips pursed tight in silent judgment. The room shifted, heads turned, conversations died. Avery's shoulders tensed, but she didn't move from her place by the framed poem. She expected outrage, accusations. Instead, it was Dahlia's voice that cut through the air, too loud, too practiced. "This is a disgrace," she snapped, "dragging family business into public view, exploiting a woman who can't defend herself." "Ah," gasps echoed. One woman clutched her purse tighter. Another stepped back from the display of Lucinda's shawl. Avery inhaled deeply, but said nothing. Sienna crossed her arms, scanning the crowd. These people don't know the full story. Grandma was old. She was confused. She didn't even understand what she signed. A camera clicked. From the far end of the room, a woman with a press badge stepped forward, recorder in hand, pen ready. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Delia Shaw?" Delia blinked. "Who's asking?" "I'm Cora Langley, Pasadena Register. We're currently investigating claims of a forged will submitted to probate under your name last fall. Would you like to comment for the record?" The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was surgical. Sienna stepped between them, blocking the reporter's path. "We won't be answering questions. You're trespassing." "This is a public event," Cora replied evenly. "Your sister submitted documentation confirming legal ownership and public invitation. You're welcome to stay, but on the record, please." Delia's skin paled, her jaw clenched. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer." "Already did," Cora said, not blinking. They had no comment either. And just like that, the power shifted. Sienna muttered something under her breath and grabbed her mother's arm. They turned, heels clicking even faster than before. As they left, Avery caught her mother's eyes. For the first time, there was no fire, no judgment, just emptiness. When the door closed behind them, the gallery seemed to exhale. Avery returned to the podium near the exit, where her grandmother's final letter sat beneath glass. She opened the copy she kept in her pocket and read the last paragraph aloud, voice steady but low. "You don't need them to see you. You only need to see yourself. I didn't leave you a legacy to make them proud. I left it so you'd remember who you are. And if they ever ask why, just smile and say, because I was never invisible. They just chose not to look." The crowd stood motionless. A few people wiped at their eyes. Others pressed hands over hearts. No applause came, just that kind of sacred quiet that doesn't beg for recognition. It holds it. Avery closed the letter gently, smoothing the edges with reverence. She didn't need her mother's validation. She didn't need Sienna's approval. And she didn't need the past to be rewritten. Because here, in this room filled with strangers and stories, Lucinda had never been more visible, and neither had she. The courtroom wasn't grand, no marble columns or dramatic lighting, just rows of stiff benches, a judge's bench elevated by 2 wooden steps, and the low hum of ceiling vents. But to Avery, it felt like a cathedral, not of faith, but of reckoning. She sat at the plaintiff's table, the folder Tobias had assembled, resting before her like sacred scripture. Her lawyer, Mr. Durant, had the quiet energy of a librarian, grey suit, wire-framed glasses, and a calm that seemed immune to intimidation. Across the aisle, Delia, Gordon, and Sienna sat in tense silence. Even Sienna's usual poise had cracked. Her mascara looked heavier than usual, as if trying to hide what her face couldn't. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Helena Moore entered, stern jaw, silver bun, eyes that had seen through decades of lies. She took her seat and wasted no time. "This hearing is to address the validity of the estate documents pertaining to Ms. Lucinda Miles, deceased." Durant stood. "Your Honour, we submit into evidence notarized documents, including the original will signed by Lucinda Miles and witnessed by Mr. Tobias Fields. We also provide audio recordings, bank transfer records, and documentation of a forged will submitted posthumously by the defendants." He stepped forward, handing the judge a thick binder. Then he nodded toward Avery. She stood. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't quiver. My grandmother trusted me with more than assets, Avery began. She trusted me with the truth. This, she held up the will, was signed, witnessed and notarized a year before her passing. She left me everything, not because I'm special, but because I stayed. Judge Moore reviewed the document. Is this the same version submitted by the defendants? No, Your Honour, Durant replied. The version they submitted contained different language, including a clause stating Ms. Miles, Avery, was not of sound mind. The signature is also inconsistent with Lucinda's verified handwriting. Judge Moore raised an eyebrow. Do you have handwriting verification? We do. Durant slid forward another sheet. Independent analysis from 2 experts. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, then came the audio file. Avery pressed play on the small recorder. Gordon's voice crackled through the speaker. Don't tell Avery, she'll want a cut. Then Sienna. Once she's gone, we sell. That Montana land could clear our debt. And finally, Dilea. Just keep her comfortable, then we'll move fast. Silence. Judge Moore leaned forward. Is this your voice, Ms. Shaw? Dilea opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't deny it. Mr. Durant, the judge said slowly, do you have documentation showing financial exploitation? Yes, Your Honour, he replied, holding up a set of bank statements. Over 8 years, more than $200,000 withdrawn from Ms. Miles's account by the defendants without written consent. The judge didn't flinch. Court finds the forged will invalid. Legal ownership of the estate, including the house, land and remaining funds, is awarded solely to Ms. Avery Miles. Furthermore, a restraining order will be issued effective immediately against all 3 defendants. They are prohibited from contacting Ms. Miles or entering the property again. Avery closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply breathed. The gavel fell, final and sharp. Across the aisle, Gordon slumped. Sienna stared at the floor. Dilea's expression cracked for just a second. Shock, rage, and something like loss. But none of it was for Lucinda. They weren't mourning a woman. They were mourning control. And now, it was gone. The courthouse steps felt longer coming down than they had going up. Avery moved slowly, the afternoon sun catching the edges of her coat and casting long shadows behind her. Around her, the world moved as usual. Cars passed. A child chased a pigeon across the sidewalk. But inside her, something had shifted. She didn't rush home. She took the long route through neighbourhoods she once walked as a teenager, past gardens she used to admire through fences, past the corner store Lucinda always said had the softest peaches in the county. The wind was gentle but steady, like it too was trying to move things forward. When Avery reached the house, it greeted her not with grandeur, but with stillness. Not hollow, not hostile, just still. She walked into the front room, then headed upstairs towards the cedar chest at the foot of Lucinda's bed. She hadn't opened it since the day of the funeral. The hinges creaked, and the scent that rose, a mix of cedarwood and lavender, hit her like a memory she didn't know she still carried. Folded neatly beneath a quilt was a leather-bound journal. Faded green, the edges worn from years of thumbed pages. Avery sat on the bed and opened it gently. Most entries were short, dates, grocery lists, half-formed thoughts, but toward the middle the handwriting changed. Shakier, yes, but more deliberate. She flipped to a page marked with a corner fold and saw her name. If Avery ever finds this, I want her to know. The ink had bled slightly, as if written in a moment of shaky emotion. That I saw her, all of her, even the parts she hid to keep from making others uncomfortable. I saw how she gave, I saw how they took, and if the day ever comes when she stands alone, I want her to remember, she is enough. If no one else chooses her, may she always choose herself. Avery's breath caught. The words blurred beneath tears, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, let them soak into the paper like a seal. She closed the journal gently and stood. Outside, the sky had softened into that golden hour hue Lucinda used to call heaven's apology for a hard day. Drawn by something instinctive, Avery walked out to the garden. The tomato beds had long gone wild, ivy tangled, the soil dry. But near the edge, by the spot Lucinda used to kneel with her straw hat and worn gloves, something caught the light. A small green shoot, just one. Tiny leaves unfurling, fragile but determined. Avery crouched beside it, her hand hovering just above the dirt. She didn't touch it. She just watched. Let it breathe. Let it rise. Lucinda used to say, you don't need a whole garden to prove something's alive, just one brave root. Avery smiled through tears. This wasn't just a sprout. It was a sign that something had taken root again, that something, despite everything, had survived. She whispered into the wind, not expecting an answer, but knowing it would carry. I choose me. And in that moment, with dirt under her nails and a legacy in her chest, Avery Miles felt more grounded than she ever had in her life. Justice had come, not as thunder or gavel, but as green, quiet, alive. It was the faintest sound, a soft click, almost like a breath held too long. Avery had just finished rinsing the dirt from her hands in the kitchen sink when she heard it. Something behind the fireplace. Something loose. She turned, heart tapping against her ribs. The house had been quiet for days now, peacefully so. But this was different. Crossing the living room, she knelt beside the old brick hearth. Her fingers traced the edges of each brick, pressing gently until one of them gave way, sliding back half an inch with a dusty groan. Behind it, tucked in a hollow cavity, was a small manila envelope sealed with a dab of red wax. On the front, in Lucinda's unmistakable handwriting, it read, "For Avery, when they're gone." Her breath hitched. She sat back on her heels, the envelope heavy with meaning despite its size. The room felt impossibly still, like the walls themselves were listening. She broke the seal. Inside were two things, a folded letter and a small key wrapped in soft cotton cloth. The key was old, iron-cold and ornate. It looked hand-forged, the kind made for locks long forgotten. She opened the letter next. "My Avery, if you're reading this, then you've already done what I couldn't. You stood in the storm. You didn't run from the hard things. You didn't silence yourself. I've watched people try to take pieces of you for years, and still you gave. Still you stayed kind. This is the last thing I ever hid. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I needed you to trust yourself first. The map will show you where. The key will let you in. And what's inside, that's not just for you to inherit, it's for you to decide what to become." Avery's hands shook slightly as she unfolded the second page, a detailed map of a property in rural Montana, coordinates etched in pencil. At the bottom, a small caption, "Liza's Vault." She didn't hesitate. 2 days later, she stood on a gravel path surrounded by pine trees, wind whispering through the branches like voices of women long gone. The Montana air was sharp with pine and earth, clean in a way that made her lungs ache from how unfamiliar it felt. The storage shed sat quietly among the trees, its metal frame weathered but strong. A small plaque above the door read simply, "Liza's Vault." Avery pulled the key from her coat pocket, its weight suddenly heavier in her hand. She slid it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. The door opened, and inside she found legacy. Boxes lined the walls, each labelled meticulously in Lucinda's handwriting. Some read 1963, Paris, others legal documents, and one near the far wall in larger script, "Do not touch unless you're Avery." She opened it slowly, reverently. Inside, silk-wrapped jewellery, a black velvet box, and beneath it, folders of documents, titles to land, savings bonds, letters from lawyers. The assets were staggering, over $3 million in value, stored quietly, protected. But it was the velvet box that drew her breath. She opened it. There, resting on black satin, was a diamond ring. Oval cut, vintage setting, brilliant and impossible. And beneath it, a note. "For your own hand, not anyone else's." Avery stared at the ring, tears welling. She didn't think about the money, the value, the insurance. She thought about Lucinda's fingers sewing pearls into shawls, about warm soup at midnight, about someone who had seen her when everyone else chose not to. She slid the ring onto her finger. It fit like it had been waiting. The deeper Avery dug into Liza's vault, the more surreal it became. Every box she opened whispered history. Clippings from Lucinda's travels in Europe, bank statements tied to investment accounts Avery had never heard of, even a yellow deed to a small cabin in Vermont. But it was one chest, hidden beneath 3 crates labelled seasonal linens, that stopped her cold. It was heavy, sealed with 2 brass latches and a velvet ribbon, faded with age. When she undid the ties and lifted the lid, a soft scent of rose and cedar drifted out, and her breath caught. Inside, arranged in silk-lined compartments, was a private jewellery collection unlike anything Avery had ever seen. Brooches shaped like violets, antique hair combs inlaid with mother-of-pearl, sapphire earrings, Art Deco rings, strands of pearls thicker than her thumb. Every piece looked like it belonged in a museum or a royal treasury. She counted 47 items, all appraised, catalogued, documented. A note lay on top of the inventory. Estimated total value, $3.1 million. Avery blinked. She wasn't sure what stunned her more, the monetary worth or the fact that her grandmother had never mentioned it. These weren't gifts hoarded. They were protected, preserved, not for the sake of wealth, but for something more deliberate. She reached the bottom of the chest and found one last item, a small square velvet box, black, unlabelled. Avery opened it slowly. Inside was the ring, the same one that had silenced a room of people who'd once called her invisible. Oval cut, vintage, impossible brilliance, and beneath it, nestled in the satin, was a card. "Only for your hand." Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The metal felt warm, as if it had been waiting. She slid it back onto her finger, where it belonged, not because of its value, but because of its meaning. Lucinda hadn't chosen Avery because she was useful. She chose her because she was worthy. That night, Avery didn't check into a hotel. She stayed on the property, wrapped in an old quilt on a folding cot. The Montana sky stretching endlessly overhead. Stars blinked in waves, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to prove anything to anyone. She just breathed. And it was enough. 2 days later, she returned to Pasadena. The house greeted her like it knew she wasn't visiting anymore. It knew she had come home. The first thing she did was pull out the seed envelope from Lucinda's desk drawer, labelled in fading ink, "Last summer, tomato." She took it to the garden. The soil was softer now, more forgiving. She knelt, hands bare, and pressed each seed into the earth with quiet care. She didn't rush. She didn't cry. She just planted. Later, in Lucinda's room, Avery replaced the linens, dusted the windowsills, and laid one of the old novels, her grandmother's favourite, on the nightstand. It wasn't about comfort, it was about honouring the rhythm that had once made this house more than wood and walls. She stood at the window, mug of tea in hand, and looked out. Tiny green shoots were beginning to break through the dirt. They weren't loud, but they were undeniable, like truth, like legacy, like love passed down through calloused hands and quiet choices. Avery smiled, the ring on her finger catching the last light of day. This wasn't the ending. It was the beginning, not of riches, but of a life finally lived without apology.